Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F-words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic.
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
To enjoy this episode ad-free, please visit patreon.com/forensic tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
When the body of a 19-year-old mother was discovered murdered inside her apartment in 1988, the residents of Three Rivers, Michigan were shocked. But the brutal details of her murder weren't the one thing that left people in the community on edge. It was the fact that when the young mother's body was discovered by her fiancé, the victim's 8-month-old daughter was found still sleeping in her crib in the bedroom next door. But without any solid leads, the investigation quickly turned cold. And the victim's family would have to wait over 3 decades and new advancements in forensic science technology to finally get justice. This is Forensic Tales, episode 325, The Murder of Cathy Swartz. Welcome to Forensic Tales. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell. Forensic Tales is a weekly true crime podcast with a forensic twist. Each episode features real stories highlighting how forensic science was used to uncover the truth. If you enjoy deep dives into real cases and the science behind them, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. And if you want even more content, including monthly bonus episodes and behind-the-scenes updates, you can join our community over on Patreon. The support there truly helps keep the show going. To learn more, visit patreon.com/forensic tales. Let's get into today's case. Three Rivers, Michigan won't be the first place you think of when talking about brutal murders that go unsolved for over 30 years. It's a small town about 2 hours east of Chicago and 1 hour from Grand Rapids. But just because it's not a place you typically think of, that doesn't mean violent crimes don't happen there. Although only about 8,000 people call Three Rivers, Michigan, home, the rate of violent crime there is actually higher than the national average, with 2022 data showing a rate of 41.27 per 1,000 people. At first glance, those numbers might seem a little high or even shocking, but by comparison, they're still lower than many other major Michigan cities like Detroit, Flint, and Kalamazoo, which are all ranked among the most dangerous in the state. All of that is to say, violent crime can happen anywhere, even in small, rural, middle-class communities like Three Rivers. It was December 2nd, 1988 at 5:30 in the morning when Mike Warner headed out the door for work at a local paper plant. But before he left, he kissed his fiancée, 19-year-old Cathy Swartz, and her 8-month-old baby girl Courtney goodbye. He also handed Cathy a handful of loose change because she planned to do laundry later that morning. Then after saying their goodbyes, Cathy went back to the bedroom to lie down and get a little more sleep while her daughter slept in her crib. The rest of Mike's workday went by like it did every day, and by 3:30 that afternoon, he was headed back to the two-bedroom apartment he shared with Cathy on East Hoffman Street in Three Rivers. The place wasn't anything fancy. The community, Riverside Townhouses, was just a cluster of brick and aluminum-sided rentals on the edge of town. But for Mike and Cathy, it was the place they planned to start the rest of their lives together, with her baby, Courtney. And right there in the middle of the apartment, they had a fully decorated Christmas tree to celebrate the upcoming holiday in just a few weeks. It was going to be Courtney's first Christmas, so the couple had already put most of her presents under the tree, including a stuffed Kermit and Miss Piggy. Mike expected to find Cathy watching her favorite soap opera, Guiding Light. He also expected little Courtney to be taking her afternoon nap in the crib. But as he approached the apartment, he was a little surprised to find the front door unlocked. Even though he knew his fiancé was home, it still felt a little strange to find the door unlocked. And as he walked inside, he immediately knew something was really, really wrong. The first thing he saw was the blood. It was virtually everywhere. The floors, the furniture, the walls almost looked like they had been painted in blood. Mike frantically called out Cathy's name over and over again, hoping he would get a response. At nearly the same exact time, he ran toward the master bedroom on the second floor of the apartment, and that's when he found her body. Just like the rest of the place, she was lying in the doorway of the bedroom, completely covered in blood. Shocked and terrified about what he just witnessed, he ran out of the apartment and went straight to the neighbors, who called the police. He was too upset to even put into words what he had just seen. Within minutes, officers from the Three Rivers Police Department were working their way through the apartment, making sure it was clear and that no one else was still inside. And while going through the place, they made two horrible discoveries. The first was that Mike's worst fears were true. His 19-year-old fiancée, Cathy, was dead. She'd been beaten and strangled before having her throat cut. And number two, her daughter, whom they planned to raise together, was standing unharmed in her crib in the bedroom next door. She still had a fresh diaper, suggesting Cathy had just changed her before being killed. But this poor little baby was just feet away from where her mother had been murdered in cold blood. Mike took the baby out of the apartment, and the Three Rivers Police Department called in the Michigan State Police. The first priority was to secure the scene and start collecting and preserving evidence. They would have no way of knowing it at the time, but what they collected during the course of their initial investigation would ultimately lead to Cathy's killer. Although this crime happened in 1988, when forensic testing was just in its infancy, there was enough evidence at the scene to tell state investigators what likely happened. And all of it suggested that Cathy's last few moments on Earth were marked with total and complete terror. The first clue was that there weren't any signs of forced entry and nothing had been stolen. No locks to the apartment had been broken. No windows were shattered. All signs pointed to the fact that Cathy likely opened the front door for her killer. That clue also suggested she likely knew him. No young mom who's home alone with her infant baby is going to open her front door for a random stranger. So this was the work of someone close to her. The second clue was that Cathy was still wearing her pajamas, leading investigators to suspect she had been attacked late morning or early afternoon. The other big clue came directly from the blood evidence. Not only was it a messy crime scene, but the blood also told a story. It suggested that Cathy was first attacked in the kitchen. A struggle ensued and she was stabbed. But there was a trail of blood that led straight to the master bedroom upstairs, as if she had tried to run upstairs to call for help. She didn't run out of the apartment because she knew her baby was asleep in the crib upstairs. So she thought if she could just reach the phone upstairs, she could call for help. She had to protect her daughter at all costs. Once Cathy and her killer reached the upstairs bedroom, police believe he tried to sexually assault her. But when she continued to resist, that's when things turned deadly. He continued to beat her, strangle her, before stabbing her more than a dozen times. And if that wasn't enough for this monster, he then used his knife to cut her neck from ear to ear. All of this happened just feet away from her baby. Here's how Michigan State Police crime scene technician Ken Laninga described it to Target 8 in a 2023 interview. It was probably bloodier than most scenes, other than, where the blood was found. It was smeared up the railing and against the wall going upstairs. That's the thing that struck you. It appeared as though she was fighting for her life. She was trying to survive. Unfortunately, that was not the case, he said. I had small children at the time, not that young. Thinking of that poor little baby in that crib, hearing what's going on, and I'm sure her mother is screaming, end quote. Most of the blood inside the apartment belonged to Cathy, but not all of it. Based on some of the evidence at the scene, the police believed that during the struggle, Cathy's killer was injured, which isn't uncommon in these types of attacks, especially involving a knife. Cathy could have been the one to injure him, or he could have hurt himself with the knife he was holding. Either way, traces of the suspect's blood were found inside the apartment. On Cathy's pink phone in her bedroom, crime scene technicians found 2 bloody fingerprints. One belonged to Cathy, but the other one didn't. Also disturbing was the fact that her phone line had been cut. So even if she was able to get back to her feet, her killer made sure she wasn't ever going to call for help. But the bloody fingerprint on the phone wasn't the only clue the killer left behind. A single bloody bare footprint was found in Cathy's bathroom. It was found between the toilet and the shower. But here's a strange detail about that. No footprints were found in the snow directly outside the apartment complex. So it was clear to investigators that the suspect tried cleaning up in the upstairs bathroom before he left. They also knew he cleaned up because the water was still running when the cops showed up. Whoever the killer was had washed his clothes in the shower and even taken off his shoes before fleeing. Even though this was the late 80s, he was still careful not to leave any forensic clues behind. But he wasn't able to outsmart Michigan State forensic experts. Based on measurements of the single bloody bare footprint, they determined that the killer was a size 9. And just like fingers, the toes and balls of the feet have distinct prints. They aren't as good as fingerprints, but they're still viable clues. While going through the rest of the apartment, state investigators discovered that Cathy's killer had left at least 2 cryptic messages behind. To try to locate evidence not visible to the naked eye, they used a handheld wand alongside powders and special goggles. This was actually the first time the state police had ever used this type of equipment. And when they turned off the lights in the kitchen and activated the device, they saw a strange green message written across the refrigerator. Harley was here. But that wasn't the only message they found. Written on the inside of one of Cathy's thighs, they saw the message, "I was here." And the chilling details don't stop there. When Mike first arrived home, he heard the radio turn to a station Cathy never listened to, Easy Listening. This seemed to suggest that the killer had changed the station. Another strange detail: police detective Kenny Baker was one of the first on the scene, and according to him, he believed someone had moved her body. They had turned it around 180 degrees, pulled it out to the bedroom doorway so she could look at her baby in the crib. Cathy's autopsy lined up with everything detectives observed back at the crime scene. This was a very, very brutal attack on a seemingly innocent young mother. She had suffered multiple stab wounds across her body, including her head, legs, midsection, back, and 2 on her hands. Those injuries were especially chilling because they were defensive wounds. She did everything she possibly could to not only save herself, but also her sleeping baby. Her official cause of death was the deep cut to her throat and strangulation. Cathy Swartz grew up on a 2-acre farm not far from Three Rivers. Her dad worked at a local bowling alley, so that was always her and her friends' favorite spot to hang out at. She would also eventually join a bowling league with her mom when she got older. As a young girl, she liked to draw, ride her horse, and was an active member of her Girl Scout tribe. She attended Mendon High School and was part of the 1987 graduation class. The class was so small that the student school pictures barely filled 2 pages of the yearbook. But Cathy never got the chance to graduate from high school. In March of 1988, when she was just 18, she gave birth to her daughter, Courtney. And although she only got to spend a few months with her daughter, Cathy was described by everyone as a great mom. She was a great mom. She was strong. She was confident in her ability to be a mom. She was just a wonderful person all around. One of her good friends from high school said in an interview, "Courtney was her pride and joy. She was everything to her, and she took very good care of her, loved her very much." End quote. When Courtney was just 6 months old, Cathy met Mike Warner in September 1988, and by November 10th of that year, they were engaged just 3 weeks before she was murdered. When it came to suspects, Michigan state investigators felt pretty confident that she knew her killer, so they focused their attention on those closest to her, including one of her ex-boyfriends. 2 days after the murder, he was arrested and brought in for questioning, but he denied having any involvement. He even provided investigators with an alibi, saying he was at work that day, then went to a dance with his girlfriend. But detectives weren't buying it. He was the ex-boyfriend, and they were sure Cathy let her killer inside. So he was asked to take a polygraph, which he happily agreed to because he stood by his innocence. And sure enough, he passed with flying colors. But they didn't just have to take his or the polygraph's word for it. They also had the forensic evidence. Although this was 1988, most police departments were using blood typing to rule in or out potential criminal suspects. And when the ex-boyfriend's blood type was compared to the blood found at the crime scene, they weren't a match, so the police could move on from him. But by the time they had confirmation, the ex-boyfriend had already spent over 2 weeks in jail for a crime he didn't commit. He would eventually sue the city of Three Rivers for wrongful imprisonment, saying that even when the blood typing tests came back, they continued to hold him without any legal cause. The next person crossed off the list was Mike Warner, the fiancé. The police never really had a reason to suspect him, but they had to make sure they did everything they could. They needed to cross their T's and dot their I's when it came to this case. So after verifying that he was at work all day, Mike Warner was officially eliminated. He had absolutely no motive to want to harm Cathy. By all accounts, he was looking forward to spending the rest of his life with him and her baby Courtney. The police continued to work their way down the suspect list, and the next name that popped up was another man from Cathy's past, Michael Howard. In a paternity lawsuit, she insisted he was the father of little Courtney. So the theory became, could Michael have killed Cathy because of the paternity claims? Maybe he didn't want to be a dad and did this out of anger. 4 days after the murder, detectives learned that the paternity results were in. Michael Howard was indeed the father. He might have been a new father, but he wasn't a murderer. In the end, he was cleared of everything. His footprints weren't a match, his fingerprint wasn't a match, and he didn't share the correct blood type as Cathy's killer. He had been working all day before spending time with his girlfriend and his mom. The town of Three Rivers, Michigan, is pretty small, so you would think the police would get another suspect pretty quickly. They were likely hiding in plain sight. So investigators went door to door around Cathy's neighborhood speaking to people. And that's when they learned from a neighbor that someone had tried breaking into their apartment on the same day as Cathy's murder. And when police went out to this particular unit, they found pry marks on the door jamb. But based on their investigation, they thought this was simply a cover-up or ruse. It was an attempt by someone to make it look like this was the work of a burglar targeting this neighborhood. Several of Cathy's other neighbors said they saw someone they didn't recognize near her apartment that day. But the information was really hard for detectives to follow up on. One neighbor said they saw a man, while the other said they saw a woman. Ultimately, sketches of both a man and a woman were drawn up, but neither produced any promising leads, and neither person was ever identified. Beyond identifying witnesses, state detectives also interviewed hundreds of people from the area, taking footprint and fingerprint samples as they went. They would eventually collect more than 5,000 footprints from potential suspects. But most of the interviews resulted in a dead end, and none of the footprints matched the one found inside the bathroom. Cathy just wasn't someone who had any enemies. She was quiet, she was kind. She was a tomboy who loved hunting with her dad, and she spent most of her days at home caring for her baby. She also didn't have a drug or alcohol problem. She wasn't involved in any type of illegal activity. According to those who knew her, they couldn't think of a single person who would want to do this. There's so much noise around weight loss right now, trends, opinions, medications. It's hard to know what's actually right for you. Through hers, you're connected with a medical provider who determines if treatment is right for you. If prescribed, your treatment plan is personalized to support you in reaching your goals. They even offer the convenience of 100% online care with licensed providers on the other side, who learn your story and create a personalized plan to deliver healthy progress you can maintain. So no more yo-yoing, just steady results. Feel like your best self again? Visit forhers.com/tales to get a personalized, affordable plan that gets you. That's forhers.com/tales. forhers.com/tales. Weight loss by Hers is not available everywhere. Compounded drug products are not approved or evaluated for safety, effectiveness, or quality by the FDA. Prescription required. See website for full details, important safety information, and restrictions. Actual price depends on product and plan purchased. I don't know if it's because I'm a new mom, but I've been thinking more about sleep lately. I usually get around 9 hours of sleep each night, and I've been feeling great to tackle each day. For me, the big shift was realizing that sleep isn't just about hours. It's the foundation for everything: performance, mood, focus, recovery, even how you age. And here's the part that surprised me. You can't fully understand your sleep without looking at your lab tests. If your sleep is off, your results will likely show it with elevated inflammation and shifts in glucose and cortisol. And when sleep improves, that shows up too. That's what I appreciate about Function. It gives you real data so you know what's happening inside your body. Sleep isn't just a habit, it's biology. If you want a deeper look, whether you're improving it or troubleshooting, you have to measure it. I use this and you should too. Own your health and start with your heart. Function gives you access to 160 plus lab tests each year, including advanced markers for heart health, inflammation, stress, hormones, and toxins for $365 a year. That's $1 a day. Learn more and join using my link. Visit functionhealth.com/tales and use gift code Tails 25 for a $25 credit toward your membership. In a very bizarre twist, on the same exact day of Cathy's murder, at almost the same exact time, a car ended up in the St. Joseph River. Before it plunged into the water, it was seen speeding out of Three Rivers. It took emergency responders about 30 minutes to pull the driver, 24-year-old Christina Shelton, and her 3-year-old daughter from the car, but only the daughter survived. What makes this event so bizarre isn't just the fact that it happened on the same day as Cathy's murder. It's that Cathy and Christina Shelton were next-door neighbors. Police were never able to determine why or how she and her daughter ended up in that river. And just to be sure, they compared footprints and fingerprints on Christina's death certificate against those left by Cathy's killer. They weren't a match. When all the local leads dried up, the Three Rivers police asked the state police for a criminal profile of her killer, and this is what they came up with. Criminal profilers with the Michigan State Police believed the suspect was a male aged 15 to 25 with the maturity of a 15-year-old. He was likely within her social circle, but wasn't someone extremely close to her. He likely had trouble forming deep, meaningful relationships with women, and after the murder, he tried to distance himself from the area of Three Rivers. He might have even moved out of the state completely. To those who know him, they wrote, he may be the last person on earth they would suspect. He was probably remorseful for the killing and scared he might be caught. So based on this profile, the police continued to focus their attention on all the men Cathy could have known. After the murder, baby Courtney went to live with Cathy's parents. They would eventually tell her about her mother's murder when she was in elementary school. This was something she had to live with for the rest of her life. She was just an infant when this happened, so she's had to spend the rest of her life without a mom. She never even had the chance to get to know her. This was also extremely hard on Mike, the fiancé. He really struggled to move on after this. It was especially difficult because he was the one who discovered the body. Most people assumed this case would be solved relatively quickly. You can't just murder a young mom from a small town and get away with it. But that's not what happened. The case wasn't solved quickly. This tragedy dragged on for years. For almost 6 months, the lead detective on the case stopped by the cemetery where Cathy had been buried, thinking her killer might show up. It wouldn't be the first time a suspect has done that. But month after month went by, and no credible suspect ever emerged. For a while, the police considered the possibility that this case might be connected to 2 other murders in northern Indiana, both within 2 hours of Three Rivers. Both women lived alone, had their throats slit, and just like Cathy, they were both killed on a Friday. The first was 24-year-old Lisa Kopanakis from Portage City, Indiana. She was killed in August 1989, just 8 months after Cathy. The second was 18-year-old Sherry Herr, who was killed 2 months later in October. Thinking these cases might be related, a few detectives from Three Rivers attended Sherry's funeral, wondering if they might recognize someone. If they saw a fellow Three Rivers resident there, maybe they were a suspect. But absolutely nothing came from that. Those 2 Indiana murders remain unsolved. By the end of 1989, the investigation was over a year old. And once again, the Three Rivers police appealed to the public for their help. They even increased the reward to $7,000. But not even money could push the case forward. 1989 came and went, then 1990, then 1991. Then eventually, several more years passed. As time went on, the police still had their 2 biggest clues: the bloody fingerprint found on the telephone and the footprint from the bathroom. DNA testing still wasn't good enough, but investigators thought maybe fingerprint profiling might help. so the print was entered into the automated fingerprint identification system. And while they waited to hear back, there was a lot of hope they would find a match. But the results were disappointing, especially for Cathy's family. There wasn't a match in the system. Fast forward to 2012. The state police contacted local authorities about using the national DNA database. So all the biological evidence they had was entered into the system. But once again, there wasn't a hit. By 2022, the case was 34 years old. Cathy's daughter, Courtney, was all grown up and had even become a mother herself. For almost her entire life, she didn't have the name of the person responsible for taking her mom's life while she sat in the crib next to her. But all of that was about to change, because by 2022, forensic testing had come a long way since the 1980s. That year, the Three Rivers Police Department got a new police chief, and one of the first things he did was push to have this case reopened. The reason it was so important to him was that it was the city's only unsolved homicide. And that's when an idea popped into his head. Why not submit Cathy's case for forensic genetic genealogy testing? It's a topic we've covered in so many episodes of the show before. But just in case you're new here, this type of forensic testing made headlines after the arrest of the Golden State Killer in 2018. After evading justice for decades, police in Northern California were finally able to identify him after connecting crime scene evidence to his family members. Since then, hundreds of old cold cases have been solved using this same type of technology. So the police in Three Rivers wondered if the same could be done in Cathy's case. They had biological evidence, they just didn't have a match. None of the Three Rivers investigators had any experience with this, so they enlisted the help of state detectives once again. Unlike small-town police departments, most state agencies receive grant funding to examine old cold cases with usable biological evidence. And Michigan just so happens to be one of those states. So all the biological evidence in the case was sent to Othram, a private lab in Texas that specializes in this type of advanced forensic testing. And as soon as they received it, they went through 4 steps to determine if they would be able to help or not. The first step was determining how much biological evidence there was. If there isn't enough, sometimes there's nothing they can do with it. The second step was to determine how degraded the sample was. This was a murder dating back over 3 decades, so none of the evidence was new or fresh. After that, they needed to determine whether the samples were contaminated and finally, if they were part of a mixture. Once all 4 of those boxes could be checked off, Othram could move forward to the sequencing process. But if they couldn't pass all these steps, it would have to be sent back to investigators. The last thing they want to do is mess with biological evidence that's considered untestable, because you never want to burn evidence or money if you don't have to. None of this testing is free or cheap. So if they spent money and time testing material that wouldn't lead anywhere, it's best to know that in the beginning. Fortunately, the evidence in this case passed all 4 steps, and Othram was able to proceed forward with it. By January 2023, scientists at the lab had identified a match. They found a 3rd or 4th cousin of Cathy's killer. From there, they started building family trees, which eventually led them to one family who lived in the Three Rivers area in 1988. Once they had this information, the lab picked up the phone and called the police. And that's when the real work began. The family name the lab had identified was Waters, and a quick search revealed that the family had 4 brothers, the sons of John and Judith Waters. They were Sonny, John, Robert, and Barry. There was also another half-brother, but the lab was able to rule him out. The biological evidence collected from Cathy's crime scene belonged to a full sibling of one of these brothers. At this point, the police in Three Rivers enlisted additional help. They contacted students at Western Michigan University and asked them if they could digitize all the original case files. This was a case that dates back over 30 years, so all of the original notes and reports were handwritten. So for detectives to go through them now, that would take months, if not years. There were over 10,000 pages in the original case file, so a group of students at Western Michigan University took on the project of digitizing all the reports. It took them about 2 weeks just to sort through everything. After that, they scanned and organized everything on a computer. It was then uploaded into a system where detectives could keyboard search it. Once everything was digitized, it was then handed back to Three Rivers investigators. These students might not have believed it, but their hard work would help solve a 3-decade-old cold case. Now that detectives had a digitized case file, they could easily search through all the original reports and suspect interviews. So they focused their search on the 4 brothers the lab had identified. The first to be ruled out was Barry. His genetic profile was already in the system because he had a lengthy criminal record, and it didn't match, so he could be crossed off. That left the other 3 brothers. 2 of them were interviewed and still lived locally in the area. The first was Sonny. He agreed to provide a DNA sample, and it came back negative. The same was done with his brother John. So they were both eliminated. That left only one of the 4 remaining Waters brothers, Robert. Unlike his brothers, Robert Waters no longer lived in Michigan. He had moved to South Carolina over 3 decades earlier and started his own plumbing business. Interestingly enough, Robert was a childhood friend of Cathy's fiancé, Mike. When they were kids, they would have sleepovers together, and just 1 month before the murder, he and his girlfriend had actually visited Cathy and Mike's apartment. But he had moved out of state shortly afterward, and the police never checked his fingerprints during the original investigation. To make contact with Robert Waters, detectives went with a direct approach. They got a search warrant for his DNA and fingerprints and coordinated with local law enforcement in South Carolina. They knew he still worked as a plumber and was usually out on jobs Monday through Friday. So they traveled to South Carolina and waited to make contact with him on a Sunday. On April 30th, 2023, the police set up surveillance outside his house and waited for him to come outside. And as he did, they approached him, saying they were following up on an old cold case. To many of the officers' surprise, he seemed more than willing to help. He said he was happy to come down to the police station and answer any questions they might have. But before he did, he said he needed to run some errands. So the officers said, "Sure, no problem. Come down to the station whenever you're done. We'll be there waiting for you." But here's the problem. Robert Waters never showed up. And when the police tried reaching him on his cell phone, the call went straight to voicemail. Then about 20 minutes later, they tried calling him again. This time he answered. But instead of agreeing to an interview, he wanted to know more about the detectives' questions. They told him they were looking into an old case from 1988 and wanted to ask him some questions about it. But Waters said he didn't think he should without an attorney. He said he could come in next week with his attorney and answer any questions they had. But the police couldn't wait that long. They had already traveled to South Carolina from Michigan, and they weren't leaving until they sat down and spoke with their prime suspect. A few minutes after that phone call ended, the police got a call from Waters' attorney. Detectives explained to him that they already had a warrant for his DNA and fingerprints, so he could either do this the easy way or the hard way. Eventually, the attorney agreed and said they could come to Waters' house and execute the warrant. So later that day, detectives were at his doorstep collecting his fingerprints and a saliva sample. but the results weren't immediate. They had to collect the prints using ink and email them back to Michigan, where 2 state police examiners were waiting to compare the prints. That entire process took about 5 hours, and throughout the whole time, detectives were just sitting in Robert Waters' living room making small talk. He never once panicked. He never once asked them to leave. He just sat there and made conversation with homicide detectives for over 5 hours without a care in the world. But the wait was worth it because the comparison revealed a match. It was Robert Waters' fingerprint found on Cathy's pink bedroom telephone. On April 30th, 2023, 54-year-old Robert Waters, a successful plumber, husband, and father of 2 children living in a $500,000 home, was under arrest for the 1988 murder of Cathy Swartz. This was a crime he committed when he was just 19 years old. And when the handcuffs were slapped on his wrists, he showed very little emotion. It was like he knew this day was eventually going to come. After his arrest, investigators would also learn that his footprint was a perfect match, and so was the blood found at the crime scene. All the forensic evidence pointed in his direction. The first person detectives told about his arrest was Cathy's adult daughter, Courtney. She was happy that someone had finally been identified, but no arrest will ever bring back her mother's life. When it came to motive, everyone was puzzled. Robert Waters didn't fit the profile of a cold-blooded killer, so why would he commit such an awful crime? And he never once showed any ounce of remorse. But there were certain things that made sense in hindsight. Cathy's fiancé, Mike, had gone to school with Robert Waters, and Cathy used to work at the same grocery store that Waters did. The police also knew he had stopped by their apartment a few weeks before the murder. So if Robert Waters knocked on Cathy's door that day, she would have let him inside. We just don't understand why. But this story ended in a way virtually no one saw coming. About a week after his arrest, on May 6th, Robert Waters was found dead inside his jail cell. He had taken his own life by hanging himself with a bedsheet. "He's a coward," Cathy's daughter Courtney said. "I feel there might be more to this story, and him just taking his own life was just the easiest way for him to not have to deal with anything." As for Mike Warner, he never suspected his childhood friend. "I never thought of him," he said. "He visited one time. We were friends when we were younger, you know? Now it makes you wonder, how many others could there be, you know?" According to scientists at Othram, it's too early to rule out Robert Waters and any other unsolved crimes. No amount of forensic testing or evidence will bring Cathy Swartz back. No piece of biological material will ever erase the violence she endured in her last few moments on Earth. But at the very least, forensic evidence gave her a voice when she couldn't speak for herself. Justice in her case may have been delayed, but it wasn't denied. Between new advancements in forensic testing and tenacious law enforcement officers who never gave up, her murder has finally been solved over 3 decades later. We may never understand the motive behind this senseless murder, but at least we have a name. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. If you'd like to support the show and help fund research, production, and editing, you can do so with a small monthly contribution on Patreon. Patreon supporters get early access to ad-free episodes and exclusive bonus content. Thank you so much to this week's newest supporter, Teresa Z. You can learn more at patreon.com/forensictales. And if you enjoy the show, leaving a positive rating or review really helps others discover it. For a full list of sources used in this episode, visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.